a short film exploring the politically and emotionally destabilizing consequences of September 11th and how trauma has motivated countless Americans to seek truth outside of traditional institutions. According to one filmmaker, the system failed. It didn't protect us. If you believe the military itself cannot handle protecting us, that's a very, very stressful conclusion. He went on to say, you can live with the stress or you reform the narrative.
Journalist Zaid Jilani raised his own questions about the skepticism and conspiratorial thinking that has come about since 9/11. Referencing a new YouGov survey where 34% of Americans polled said, quote, claims the U.S. government was responsible for the attacks was probably or definitely true. Zaid Jilani joins us now to discuss. Welcome, Zaid.
Hey.
So does that number surprise you, Zaid?
When the Bush administration was still in power, and conspiracy theories of that type were kind of hot. You'd see them on YouTube or on the internet. You would see similar numbers of people or similar percentages of people, kind of answering that in the poll. But I guess what surprised me more was that that number has kind of sustained itself over time, because I think part of the conspiracies around 9/11 were just like shock and disbelief that it was, it was able to happen, that terrorists could pull something like that off, and then just kind of anger that maybe the Bush people didn't take warning seriously, and so on and so forth. I think a lot of that spiraled or rolled into some people either thinking that the administration was negligent or the administration maybe let it happen or had a role in it. I was more surprised that the number has sustained itself in the year 2021, because I do remember polls like that when Bush was president. But it does suggest there's either a level of cynicism about government that's just much higher than I think I would expect, or second, that it's possible that some people are just giving kind of a polite or sarcastic answer to this question because maybe the question is somewhat absurd, which does happen sometimes.
Wait,
Go
ahead, Kim.
Go ahead. Well, it just seems to me that the number has sustained, or has it actually increased? Because I wouldn't be surprised if the number increased, and that is because as time went on, people saw the endless wars, right, that we marched into because of 9/11, or using 9/11 as an excuse. And there were trillions of dollars that were made by contractors. And so I think a lot of people would look at that and say, well, this was clearly just a ploy in order to keep us in endless war so I wouldn't be surprised if the number actually increased because of that.
Yeah, and look, I think conspiracy theories, people sometimes think they're very complicated. You see the memes, it's always sunny in Philadelphia, memes about conspiracies and things, but often they're a way to simplify the world, right? Like something doesn't make a lot of sense, so you think, well, it must have actually been for this other very simple purpose, making money. If you ask people, why did America invade Iraq? I feel like you'll probably get, 10 or 11 different answers. And I know why some of the war architects had some inkling about going into Iraq and felt strongly about it, but even I can't give you a completely straight answer as to why the war made any sense at all, or why America did it ultimately. It seemed like there was a confluence of factors. If you simply adopt a conspiracy theory, it was to make money for Halliburton or KBR, and it was all precipitated by 9/11, which the government probably did too. It actually makes a lot more sense, and it's more simple and rational than maybe what the truth is, right? And I think that exactly what you're saying is people are trying to make sense of the world when the world doesn't make sense sometimes. And it may be one reason that someone would be attracted to something like a 9/11 truth type theory.
Yeah, and people have always, I think we forget, people have always believed, some people believe weird things, and some people have very normal views on a lot of things, but have one weird belief. Like if you go back to any point in human history and you talk to the folks, some of them would think crazy things that we now know aren't true. It's true today. I don't know that the media focuses a lot on right-wing, the mainstream media focuses a lot on conspiratorial right-wing thinking, and then the reverse is true of the partisan right-leaning media, and you're kind of always being sold the idea that, crazy QAnon type stuff is out of control. There was some golden era in the past where people were just good, informed citizens. I don't think that's true. Do you think that's true?
No, it's not true. I remember the New York Times, was it New York Times or New York Magazine? They had an article, it was age of disinformation. We live in the age of disinformation. It's certainly true that because of the internet, information does spread in a particular way in a certain manner, but I don't think people were necessarily more informed in the past. And it also works in reverse, right? Good information, true information, giving people affirmative experiences that they could never have had before, also spreads much faster thanks to the internet. And I think you can see this in a successive series of things, from like the moon landing to JFK and what happened with him. There was a very high uptake of conspiratorial thinking in the American public long before there was any kind of internet or social media. And I think a lot of it comes from just, like I said, people trying to simplify a world that often doesn't make sense. I don't think it made sense to a lot of people that like an American president could just be like assassinated, right? As a popular American president in front of everyone, such a terrible security breakdown. So of course you had theories about it being the Cubans or about it being the CIA or so on and so forth, because it actually was a way for people who felt very distrustful of the situation, cynical about it, and terrified of it, to try to make some sense in the world to them. So I think it's a mistake to think of conspiratorial thinking as largely a result of the flow of information or access to information. It's always been with us, and I think it's more about people's kind of emotional or psychological response to a messy world than it would be, the fact that YouTube exists or something.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, it goes back even further than that, and it's not just the right wing. Like, for instance, that what you would consider to be the left, say in the 19th century, they were convinced William Henry Harrison was assassinated. And that it was a conspiracy by the right to take him out. They were convinced that Zachary Taylor was assassinated, and that was another kind of slave owner class assassination plot. When Lincoln was assassinated by a planter class conspiracy, people were like, well, this is the third one that they've killed in like the last 30 years. William James Bryan, his entire kind of populism was organized around a lot of conspiracies that involved, monopolists and Wall Street bankers that had grains of truth to them, but then devolved into these weird silver and gold plots that nobody could, from this vantage point, can even get their heads around, and then that flows into all the different Federal Reserve conspiracies that we still have with us today, that again have a grain of truth to them. So I guess the question, and even Lincoln saying that the Mexican War was started under false pretenses, that show me the spot of blood, where the Mexicans allegedly came over the border to start this war. So what is new about this conspiracy thinking, and are Americans unique in their willingness to believe this stuff relative to the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I don't know that anyone has done a lot of comparing in terms of populations and how they think about reality and sort of plots and politics and so on and so forth. But certainly conspiratorial thinking does happen everywhere. I think that it's funny, like if you go anywhere in the Middle East, like people generally think Israel is behind everything. Like every single thing that happens is like Mossad or so on and so forth, which honestly is very flattering to Israel if you're the Israelis, because like makes you feel much more powerful and in control than you actually are. But again, like I think offering the more simple story can sometimes make the government look more rational than it actually is. I don't think that, I think it's much more likely that a lot of these things that we think are conspiracies are just like sheer incompetence by the government, right? Like it wasn't planned out, it wasn't plotted, because the government was not very good at planning or plotting, and that's what led to a lot of the breakdowns I think that we're seeing. But if you suggest that no, this was the scheme all along, and someone benefits, it makes them look more rational, and it makes it look like it makes more sense, and it's maybe a little bit easier in your mind to organize what it is. And I think that explains everything from the conspiracy theories he talked about in the 18th century to the ones today. I think that if we ever arrived to a time when a large, significant number of people don't believe something that is like a complicated or shadowy conspiracy that's just false, I would be shocked. Because to me, it seems like a kind of a crutch or a reflex to the messy world that we live in.
It's like an unwillingness to confront our own lack of power. And I think I call him William Jennings Bryan. And that period of time, the end of the 19th century, that was the other Gilded Age. And that was a time where people really felt like they had no say in their own affairs. Farmers would see that whether or not they had a prosperous year had nothing to do with how good a job they did growing crops. It was just whatever price that they were was foisted on them. So there must be something behind that, because if you don't have the power to do anything about it, you want to believe that somebody has the power, because the idea that you're just getting steamrolled for nothing, I think, is just too painful for people to absorb.
I think it's really important to point out, though, that there are conspiracy theories, so-called conspiracy theories that end up being true.
Right.
So,
yes.
we do see this all the time as well. So it's, especially when we do talk about,
the slave class was conspiring. You're right.
Jeffrey Epstein, right? Like if someone, that story did not break and someone like 5 years before just said, no, this is this really rich guy who has this like ring and all these like rich and powerful people are tied up in it, it would sound like QAnon, right? Like it would sound like it was completely made up, but actually ended up being true. And I think that's part of the reason there's so many conspiracy theories about his death, because the original story was so wild, right? And at that point, a lot of people's social trust in this is already broken. And so, maybe you could think maybe he was assassinated. I think I know people who believe things like that. So, there certainly are actual plots and conspiracies, although they don't number nearly as much as the theories, obviously.
But the bankers and the monopolists, they are colluding to screw people over. Right. They actually are doing. Well,
and we have actually gone and meddled in elections in South America. I mean, over and over and over again, in order to make money. I mean, that was the entire banana republics, right? Was all under the guy. We wanted to make money, and so we went in and took matters into our own hands. And that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but now we know it's true.
And it's not past tense either. Yeah.
As we mark the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, we remember and honor the more than 2,000 lives tragically taken. Today and always, our hearts are with their loved ones. Thank you.